Hello and welcome to the Institute of Early Years Education. My name is Sinead McMahon and I'm the Content Manager here at the Institute. And I'm joined today by one of our content writers, Emily Askew. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
We're also joined in the background by our digital memberships manager, Sarah Rubini, and she will be she'll be available to answer any questions in our chat. So thank you, Sarah. Before we begin though, I'd just like to say, as ever, a big thank you for joining us today for this webinar. We do realise how precious your time is. But hopefully you'll feel the benefit of engaging with us for the next 15-20 minutes, and hopefully you will be inspired to make the most of the outdoors with the young children in your care. So we felt we wanted to put this session together because we know from our own experience that when it comes to using outdoor provisions, there are often many missed opportunities. Some of our early years professionals don't feel quite as confident supporting learning and play in the outdoors as much as they do in the indoor environment, and that results in less time spent in the outdoors. For many of our settings, small or uninviting outdoor environments with limited resources means that indoor provision is always going to be the more preferable option. And then, of course, we have the inconsistencies of our great British weather, which unfortunately do provide that excuse for people to stay indoors. And we do know that there are numerous reasons why outdoor spaces are often less utilised, and I know that Emily is going to look at those in a bit more depth shortly. But right now though, as we at the time of recording, we are approaching another change in season. We're getting ready for winter, and we know that with that the associated changes in weather can create an additional barrier to getting outdoors. So our main objective for this session is to support you to embrace the outdoor learning environment regardless of weather, regardless of skill set or whatever facilities you've got. We don't necessarily have to have expensive outdoor equipment. We don't necessarily have to be a fully accredited forest school leader, or indeed we don't need to have those optimum weather conditions in order for us to be able to make the most of those outdoor learning opportunities. And so we want to help you to either break down some of those barriers and start to get outdoors, or if you feel that you are already getting outdoors enough, perhaps look to refine those outdoor learning experiences that you have with the children in your care to make those interactions even more effective and of higher quality. And we just need to obviously make sure throughout it all that we take careful consideration of any necessarily health and safety requirements and make some necessary preparations which should allow us to use the outdoor spaces to their full potential. So if we just unpick the term outdoor provision and what we actually mean by it, outdoor provision in the early years in childcare literally means providing play and learning opportunities in the outdoors. And in order for outdoor provision to be effective, it's important to hold some intention behind why we want that learning to take place outdoors as opposed to indoors. So it's not just a case of taking what we would ordinarily be doing in an indoor provision and transferring it to the outdoors. It's about really considering how the outdoor environment can help to enhance that learning opportunity. So just wanted to take a moment here to reflect on some of your own experiences of outdoor learning and provision with the children in your care, and really draw on a positive experience that you've had in the outdoors. And just think about what is it that made it such a positive experience. Was it to do with the fact that the weather was preferable on that occasion? Was this something that you were really well planned for, and were you really well organised on that occasion? Was it something to do with the time of the day that you took the children outdoors? Was it to do with the number of staff that were available? Whatever it was, I want you to just think about those positive experience and think about how we can perhaps try and make those more frequent and commonplace to allow us to have those positive experiences. Now in these pictures here, you'll see that we've got some really positive images of the children. They're fully engaged, they're responding positively. But I wonder if you feel if there is anything missing from any of these images though. Just have a little look at them and think, there's something jump out at you that is missing.
I think for me, what is missing is your non-walking infants, your babies in the baby room. I was a baby room practitioner myself, and one of the real challenges for outdoor play was how, particularly when it got cold, how we engaged those children who are not yet walking themselves, possibly not even crawling, how we engage them in a real kind of outdoor provision that promotes that learning and that engagement, but in a way that they're not sat down and very cold the whole time and start to associate the outdoor space with that kind of feeling of coldness. So I think for me, looking at provisions that are not only for the children, as you can see here, who are quite confident and able to walk and are that little bit older to maybe communicate their needs in a very different way, but also those children who aren't.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. Thank you. I think as well for me, aside of the fact that we know the reality is that there will always likely to be some children who get upset because they don't like the cold, or there's likely to be somebody that's maybe fallen over, they've grazed a knee and they might be upset because of that, or they might be covered in mud, whatever the reason. The thing that strikes me that's missing from these images is that of the adult. Now, I know that none of you are going to just open the doors and leave the children to just go outdoors on their own, unsupervised. And we can be pretty sure that when these pictures were taken, there would have been an adult present as well. But it does just lead me to sort of poses that question of then the role of the adults, and for us to reflect on what our role as adults is when we are engaging in the outdoor provision. And I purposely just used the word supervision out there as well, that idea of supervising the children, and did that on purpose because unfortunately, for some early years professionals, they do see their role more in a supervisory role when they are outdoors, rather than that of an educator or a facilitator. And quite rightly so, there are always going to be additional risks in the outdoors. So we do need to be supervising really closely to make sure that we're managing those risks. But I think it's really important that just because we are maybe a bit more supervisory, that we don't lose sight of those potential learning opportunities. And it's really important to keep a focus on those high quality interactions, just as we would do in the indoor. And really try to take full advantage of the outdoor environment by introducing any new and developed vocabulary which is specific to being in the outdoors. So, for example, tuning in and observing nature and wildlife within their own natural habitats. I think it's also important that we remember that for some children, they will behave differently in the outdoors as opposed to how they do on the indoors. So that's important for us to tune into any specific interests that they display when they are in that outdoor environment. And also to bear in mind that for some children in your setting, the outdoor experiences that they have with you might be the only ones that they have. They might not have gardens, or they might not get regular access to their local parks and things. So it's really important that we make sure those children get regular access and that we make the most of those opportunities for them. Okay, I'm going to pass on to Emily now, and she's going to talk a little bit more about why it's also important.
Amazing. Thank you, Sinead. So we know that the outdoors environment brings a whole new dimension to children's experiences in play, in their development, in the wider world around them. Not only from the kind of provisions that we have outside and the ways that we might take this for specific learning outcomes, but also just the general environment itself. So the changes in temperature, engaging in play that is larger because children can run around a little bit more. There's that kind of free space. It's a larger scale outside of those four walls that really kind of opens up that freedom to get stuck into the natural world. But our interactions in early childhood with the outside world are not just that experience in the present moment. They actually pave the way for all of the healthier attitudes that we have towards physical activity and confident risk taking, as well as enhancing that kind of creative play on a different level. But those are all things that we can control when we're inside. We can control different areas. We can control the temperature of the room, the lighting, the different aspects and the different moods that we have. So when we're thinking about the outdoor space, it's really about thinking about responding to what is already out there rather than creating a scene ourselves. So writing in 1930, Margaret Macmillan highlights that children want space at all ages, but from the age of 1 to 7, space, that is ample space, is almost as wanted as food and air. To move, to run, to find things by new movement, to feel one's life in every limb. It's the life of early childhood. Writing nearly 100 years ago in 1930, these sentiments are still things that we really see today in contemporary research in kind of the day-to-day lives of the children that we spend our working life with. But it also really highlights the value of the outdoors environment as something that is contributing directly towards that healthy development on an emotional level, on a social level, and on a physical level too. But even then, the natural world that Macmillan was referring to is one that was completely different a century ago when we think about kind of sustainability and the scene in which our climate action takes place today. And it will be, again, a different one in another century as well. For example, the classic autumn image of the chestnut tree, the horse chestnut conker, that may one day be a tale of the past, as it's now facing a threatening disease that is currently under research. But again, it's just one example of how that kind of environment is really important to consider as practitioners, because the experiences that we have are potentially very different to the ones that children will be having today. And again, it will change later on, particularly thinking about the pandemic, for example, and children's relationships to the outdoors there were completely unprecedented and also unpredictable, in the sense that as key workers, we were kind of approaching it day to day in terms of the policies and the regulations that impacted how we use that space. So when we think about these interactions that we have, it's really important to give children the opportunity to grow in a really rich and diverse space, and one that is different to that indoor climate. As I said before, the kind of aspects of the indoor environment that we can change, things like the temperature or how we kind of decorate the room, make it look busier or calmer, the colours and the tones that we use. They're all things that in the indoor environment we have a real control over, and it's something that as professionals, we often put a lot of emphasis into. So the kind of boards that we have, the independence and the way that children can utilise that space. But when we think about the outdoor environment, it's often something that is ever changing and deemed to be completely out of our control, because it's kind of a look out the window, it's raining today, so we will plan to do X, Y, and Z, compared to it being sunny, and how you might alter your plans based on how we can anticipate those changes, which is really the essence of this webinar today, because we want to look at how you can still have really resourceful and meaningful interactions with children in the weather that's deemed to be less playful. So have a think about your current outdoor space. Do you plan and tailor your outdoor provisions in a similar way to your indoor? For example, do you have similar planning sheets for the kind of things that you want to experience in garden time? Outdoor play is often seen as a way to burn off energy. So it might be something to get children out when they're a little bit energetic for the indoor space, and allowing children to behave in a way that is deemed acceptable outdoors, but not so much indoors, such as climbing, taking further risks, running around, and giving them the opportunity to take those risks in a safer way in a different climate. But outdoor provisions are so much more than that. We know that from the research that highlights all of the amazing benefits that come exclusively from that outdoor interaction. And they offer a great way to create real stimulating environments that are quite often a reinvention of something that you are already doing. You already have the skill sets to promote. It's just about taking it in a different way. For example, looking at the child in the bottom right, who's using the metal jugs and pouring, particularly if that's in a kind of role play setting, you're utilising the same kind of skills that you would be expecting within a role play setting inside, but creating a really stimulating provision that is accommodating to the specialisms of outdoor. So instead, you might use the metal to feel the cold as the temperature drops and you're feeling the different sensations in the provision that you've got outside. You might be using more of a messy play style. You might be using it to encourage children to find same and different items to create a magical recipe outside that they can kind of forage for those kind of safe materials themselves, as leaves on the ground, stones and pebbles that they can mix and make different sounds. So it's all about utilising your own creativity, but following the children's lead to really gain those meaningful interactions on learning opportunities that they might not come across else. When we look at how we can respond to the outdoor provision generally, it is often much easier to do that in a sunnier season, where it's easier to have those children, as I mentioned earlier, those non-walking children. You can put them down and you know that they're not going to get cold. You can kind of take safety precautions like sun cream and shade, but you know that there's an element in which there will still be that matter of enjoyment and comfort It's obviously important at that point as well to take it from the other extreme. If it gets too hot, there's things you need to do, but it's a lot easier to navigate those kind of safety precautions and make it an enjoyable experience for everyone. Remember that as staff members, as practitioners and professionals, you're that kind of role model for implementing a positive attitude towards that outdoor space. So if you have team members who kind of are a little bit less excited about going outside, kind of encouraging them to promote that positivity so that the children can reflect it as well and know that it's a fun time to have still. It's also really important to capture the magic of these colder months, because they open up a whole new range of experiences that children either haven't had before or might not have kind of in any other space apart from when they're in your provision. For example, I remember taking a baby out for their first experience of the snow and feeling the snow as it fell down. And that's something that I'll never forget. But it was also something that parents and carers said they struggled to do because they lived in a flat. So having that experience with them and being able to harness that opportunity when we could was not only really meaningful for the child, but also a really good way to communicate with the parents as well. So I've just got a few tips on here, different areas that when I had to think about it, they were kind of the challenges that I faced myself as a practitioner, kind of thinking about getting outdoors in these colder months. So it obviously gets darker earlier, and with that, particularly if you're in a setting that runs kind of 8 till 6, it does pose a hurdle as to how we utilise that space when it gets darker about 3 o'clock, or even where there's low cloud throughout the day, and it means that it's just miserable all day long in terms of how it looks outside and how light it truly is. But there are creative ways that we can think about using that outdoor space. So indoors, we turn the lights on, but outside, we might use different activities that really harness that darkness, using torches or motion censored lights to really get children to engage in that sensory play outdoors, knowing that difference between light and dark and exploring shadows as well. With it being colder as well, obviously the temperatures can plummet, they can rise. We've had quite a mild October, for example, but I've known times where it's been snowing at this time of year. So it's just about responding in a safe way to how that kind of approaches week by week, essentially, and how it looks to you, which is where we'll come on to the risks and the risk assessment aspect later on. But I think one of my challenges was dealing with all of the waterproof gear that you get, all of the paraphernalia about wetsuits and who's got what coat, who's got double socks, all of those kind of things, which can make it a bit more challenging to kind of navigate the logistics of that outdoor time. But it can also be a really good learning opportunity in itself. So where you've got toddlers, for example, if you're working with toddlers, they might be able to take that on a little bit more. They might be able to put their own coats on. You might be able to use that as a teaching mechanism to understanding how to utilize the outdoor space responsibly, but also giving that extra addition of independence as well as a really key and purposeful learning moment. As ever as well, it comes to show, particularly with the babies, that if a child is not moving around as much and they are getting colder, it does pose a serious safety risk. But there are small changes that you can use to kind of navigate this a little bit differently. Things like using a windbreak if your garden is exposed to gusts of wind can be a good way to shelter a little bit more, in the same way that you might use a parasol in the summer, or a waterproof mat that can insulate if babies are sat down on the floor so they can still play and interact, but that is just in a safer way. Moving on to the risks, a lot of the winter weather does pose additional risk, and that's something that we know. Things from slippery surfaces or sharp features, like if ice has broken, that can actually be quite surprisingly sharp. Windy weather can cause unsafe environments as well, and obviously unstable children, if they're running around and there's a gust of wind, it's not surprising if they get taken out. So it's important to take an active approach to the risks that we have, and obviously there will be a general risk assessment that kind of gives that overarching environment awareness, but it's important to do a day-by-day risk where you're able to go out and see how that environment looks in that moment. So it's really important to kind of keep that environment safe, but it's also a great learning opportunity for the children you work with. So if you've got kind of 3 and 4 year olds in a preschool, encourage them to come out with you and do a simplified checklist aspect of the risk assessment. Are the gates locked? Can you see anything on the floor? Those kind of things that really give them a stronger sense of belonging and responsibility that they can do all year round. But in the winter, it's kind of an extra way to pose that sense of independence and belonging in a time where there might be kind of different ways of navigating the outdoor space. It might be a way to create an inclusivity for children who are slightly more reluctant to kind of get involved in that outdoor play. And finally, one of the other things that I'm just going to mention is the fact that it's wet. In Britain, we have a lot of rain, particularly in the winter months, and it can pose a bit of a challenge when you look outside, you see it's raining, and you know that it's going to be full gear for everybody. So that's something that we recognise isn't always ideal for the logistics, particularly if it's posing additional risks for slipperiness. But think about your summer activities. So water play is often used as an open-ended provocation across all ages. Babies loved it, as did the preschoolers. But it can be something that we see as a real delight in the warmer months, that it's kind of a cool down, it's fun, it's easy to dry, but a bit more of a hindrance in the winter because for whatever reason, there's kind of that additional wetness, children are getting extra soaked when they get cold, and how that lends itself into the experiences that children have generally. But it's important to encourage children to become involved in all sorts of messy play outdoors, in the same way as we would when we're thinking about how we integrate water into that messy play in the summer. In the summer, we would fill tanks, we would put them down, and children would be free to use it. Why not encourage them to naturally look at the environment around them and create their own environments for mess, whether that be jumping in puddles, or we had a really interesting experience where one of the toddlers actually got a leaf and put it in a puddle and discovered that it floated across and it made a boat. And then that encouraged a kind of loose play aspect of children finding leaves and seeing that stones would sink or make a splash, leaves would float, what would happen if they used a pine cone, and all that kind of inquiry that might not have been discovered had there not been that kind of freedom to explore the provision away from the kind of activities that had been set out, particularly for engagement. So not does that only lend itself to conversations that really promote that kind of sense of belonging, but it also gives children the skills to really encourage that provocation, exploration, and think about things in a creative way.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Just to try and round up some of those things that we've talked about now, and thinking of some top tips that we recommend that can help you to embrace the outdoors. So first of all, I think it's really important that you get your colleagues on board, whatever your role is, within your setting. Get colleagues on board. Think about the strengths and preferences across the team. You could have some of your members of the team that are really keen gardeners, and they might be able to support the development of a little allotment patch or something in your setting. So really trying to use people's strengths so that you can get people on board. And then from that, develop an action plan with your colleagues of what it is you want to do, what will you need to change to make these things happen, so that there's that real shared approach and agreement between all members. Again, as Emily was talking about there, just the risk assessments, making sure that you're keeping up to date with weather forecasts and associated up-to-date risk assessments. Do make sure that that's accessible for staff as well, that all staff have got that same agreement and understanding of it. Make sure that it's kept in an easily accessible place, etc., and that it can be updated with ease. Having sufficient resources at the ready in an organised fashion, so be prepared and organised. Like Emily was saying, when we've got all those boots and wellies and things, it's difficult, so try to make sure that there's a systematic place for them to be organised and stored, and that children, again, to develop their independent skills, they can take ownership of putting their own things on. That's really important. And it's also important to try and have that backup supply of extra clothing. So if ordinarily you ask your children to bring their own wellies, it's a good idea, if you can, over time, to build up a bank of spare wellies for children and spare outdoor clothing for those that might not have them available. Thinking outside the box, being really resourceful where you can. We know that resources are limited sometimes. It might be that your provision is limited. So again, it doesn't mean that if it's outdoor provision, it has to be on site. If there is a local area that you can take the children to explore, any woodlands, any parks, really trying to build that in, and just going for local walks even is really effective outdoor provision for the children. In terms of resources that you might have, again, we know budgets are limited, so try to make connections with any local businesses, and reach out for donations of resources that can enhance your provision. We had a good relationship with our milkman, who used to bring us milk trays, milk crates and bread boxes as well, that we used all the time in our outdoor provision. The children would use them for obstacle courses, etc. And also a local garage used to donate to us old tyres, which again, there's so many things you can do with a tyre. So really just ask, you never know what, and people are often quite happy to get things off their hands anyway, and be a little bit more sustainable in terms of passing resources on. And what we would say as well is to start small. If you're not getting outdoor too much to begin with, start with trialing things with smaller groups, smaller numbers, with shorter periods of time, and over time build things up. It might be that you want to focus on one specific aspect, so particularly focus on physical development. Might even be that you're exploring doing some mark making outdoors or something, and over time build up the provision that you are offering. So in terms of any next steps now, I think what would be really good following this session is that you try to take some time to reflect on the current ways that you are using your outdoor provision, and think about how can you enhance your provision and the use of it as the seasons change. Again, we've got a wealth of resources if you are a member that you can access on the platform, and do look out for our outdoor learning bundle in our member resources, which will be coming soon as well. Remember, if you are a member, to log your CPD points for this session, and again add in a short reflection of what it is you'd like to take forward after watching this session. And then thinking about other offers that we've got, don't forget to book your place on our upcoming webinar, which will focus on winter wellness, and we'll be exploring ways that we can look after ourselves and our colleagues as we approach the winter season. I'm conscious that we've run over time a little bit, but just to wrap up, I thought it would be nice. Emily mentioned Margaret Macmillan earlier, and I always recall one of her favourite quotes that I really like is that the best classroom and the richest cupboard is roofed only by the sky. And I think that's really important. It sums up everything we've talked about today, all those opportunities that exist in our outdoor provision, but maybe we just need to change our angle and our approach to it. Hopefully you found today's session useful, and it might just pose you to think from a different angle, and hopefully you can start to think about some changes you can make so that ultimately you can start to embrace your outdoor learning experiences with your colleagues and obviously the children that are in your care. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch up with you all again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.